God bless you, dear ones. Welcome to the Word with Chester. Today we will begin studying the 15th chapter of the book of 2nd Samuel. Thank you so much for being here. Well, Merry Christmas to you. This is actually Christmas Eve 2021, but by the time some of you listen to this, it will be Christmas Day. And I want you to know that I love you with the love of the Lord, and I hope this season has been a great season for you and that you are smiling with great joy. Well, today it's somewhat of a long chapter, so I'm going to go immediately into it. If you have your Bibles, I trust that you will read along with us as we study the Word. Well, today we'll begin at verse 1 of chapter 15. Please read along with us if at all possible. In verse 1, chapter 15, now, today we're going to be talking about the Revolt of Absalon. Now, if you remember in our last study, it was telling us about how beautiful Absalom was, and how handsome that he was, and he had no flaws from his foot all the way to the crown of his head. So that lets us know that apparently, or the way he appeared was perfect, because there was no flaws in him. But yet you can have a perfect body and perfect appearance, but yet your heart not be right with God, or your motives may not be way they should be. So at this time, in this particular passage of scripture, we're going to be reading about Absalom, and I will talk further as we begin to read, but read along with me as we begin this study. Verse 1, chapter 15, the Bible reads, "And it came to pass after this, that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses, and 50 men to run before him." Can you get the picture? Absalom, he prepared him all of these things. Now, when you're talking about chariots and men to run before them, you're talking about things that will go out to battle. Chariots were not in that day were not just to look at, or not something pretty to look at, but they were designed for battle. And Absalom prepared him 50 chariots and then 50 men to run out before them. In verse 2, "And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was that when any man who had a controversy came to the king for judgment, that Absalom called unto him and said, What city art thou? Question mark. Well, in other words, where are you from? And he said, Thy servant is one of the tribes of Israel. And Absalom said unto him, See, thy master are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee." In other words, when people would come up to talk to the king because they had a controversy, Absalom would step in the way and say that there's nobody here and nobody deputized, if I can use that word, to hear the case. And so this was the acts of Absalom, and how cunning he was, and it's going to explain why he was doing this as we read on in verse 4. Absalom said, Moreover, oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man who hath any suit or cause might come to me, and I would do him justice. Now, can you get the picture? Absalom had in his head that I want to be the judge. That's what he's saying. I want to be the judge. I'll read 4 again so you can understand this. Absalom said, Moreover, Moreover, oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man who hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. In other words, Absalom actually wanted his dad's job. Well, get the picture. People had pumped him up, and they called him beautiful, and everybody loved him because he was beautiful. And that's something that actually continues to happen when someone is a very handsome, a very beautiful, even a lady. People lift them up and brag on them and boast about them. And some people, it goes to their heads. I would not say everyone it does, because I don't believe everyone has that spirit or that attitude. But there's some people, when people boast in them or brag on them about being beautiful, about being handsome, or whatever adjective that you want to use, when they start to boast in them, it goes to their head. And here Absalom heard all of these things and the people praising him and lifting him up, and it made him want actually the king's job. Shall I read 4 again? Absalom said, Moreover, oh, that I were made judge in the land. If I was only a judge, I could just do this job so good. Sometimes you think you're ready for a job and you're really not ready for certain jobs. But yet Absalom said this in his heart. Oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man who hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. Sometimes you don't know if you'll be able to do somebody justice or not, because some things on the surface are not the way they appear, and it takes somebody that God has called and anointed to do a job like that, to judge matters properly. Now let's read in verse 5. And it was that when any man came near to him to do obeisances, he put forth his hand and took him and kissed him. Can you get the picture? Absalom. Now, Absalom is the son of the king, and so being the son of a king, that would put you in position or put you in strategic places to do a lot of things. And so Absalom, everyone who would come up to him, he would kiss them. And in other words, trying to make the people love him. And the truth is, the people did love him. Many of the people did love him, even though his motives were off. In verse 5 again, and it was that when any man came near to him to do obeisance, he put forth his hand and took him and kissed him. And on this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. And Absalom stole the heart of the men of Israel. In other words, they were going up to see the king for judgment, and Absalom would put himself, when they would approach him, he would kiss them and make them love him. Can you get the picture? He would act like he was so nice and so there that people loved him, and he stole the hearts of the people. And you got to get that picture. It can happen even today. You have to watch people, and I would never tell you to put everybody that's really beautiful or really cunning in the same boat. Everybody don't have the same motives, but here, and we find in many cases that people will use that influence. They'll get close to someone who is a leader in order to manipulate things and get people to like him, love him, or whatever the case may be. And so that was the case here. Absalom being the king's son, it put him in position there to where he could do what he's doing. And he kissed the people when they come up to him and actually stole their hearts. Let's see what he's going to do with that now. Let's read on in verse 7. And it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay pay my vow, which I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode in Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. So Absalom talking to his dad now. Let me go down now. I have made a vow to the Lord. Let me go down there so I can pay my vow. In verse 9, and the king said unto him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. Now, in verse 10, but Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. Can you get the picture? He had sent people out into strategic parts of Israel, sent spies throughout Israel, and saying, when you hear the trumpet, you tell everybody that Absalom is king in Hebron. And I want you to get the picture. If you remember the full story, Absalom was from royalty on both sides of his family. If you remember reading that Absalom, actually his mother was actually a king's daughter, a king there in Hebron. And through whatever means, David married her, whether it was an arranged marriage for peace between the two cultures or the two kingdoms. I can't tell you exactly why, but David married her, and Absalom came through that union. So his grandfather was a king, and his father was a king. Father, the king of Israel, and his grandfather was a king there in Hebron. There in Syria. Can you get the picture? Can you get that picture? All right then, let me get the right place here. Verse 10 again, but Absalom sent spies through all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. Can you get the picture? When they hear the sound of the trumpet, these is who Absalom sent through Israel now. Can you see he was doing this on purpose? It did not just, please excuse me, it did not just accidentally happen, but he sent spies down through Israel for them to spread this rumor around that when they heard the trumpet say that Absalom is king there in Hebron. Verse 11, and with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem who were invited, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. They were invited to go with Absalom. Absalom invited them to go, but he did not tell them his motives. He did not tell them what he had in his mind, what he was transpiring to do. So they were in their simpleness, if you please, and they didn't know anything as to what was going on. In verse 12, and Absalom sent for Ahithophel, and Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. Can you see? He used his beauty, he used his clout from his father, and he was winning the people. He was gaining the people, pulling them over to himself. And that's a dangerous thing. This is what you have to watch. Regardless to who you are, you're supposed to be trying to get get people to the true and the living God, and not try to get them over to yourself. But Absalom was trying to win the people over himself, and he used the influences that he had, the influence as being the son of a king that made him a prince, and people like the leader's children, if you please, and they loved Absalom because he was so beautiful, and the Bible called him beautiful, so I can call him beautiful. He was so beautiful that people just loved him just to look at him. Now let's read on in verse 13. And there came a messenger to David, saying, "The heart of the men of Israel are after Absalom." They came and told David that the heart of the men are after Absalom. And I want you to get the picture what's going on here now. If you remember that God had told David that trouble was going to come up in his own house. But get now, you know that this story is about David. And Absalom is just a character that's showing you the hand of God, and that God always keeps his promises. God always does what he says, and he had told David trouble was going to come up in his house. And I want to tell you, there's no more hurting feeling than when one of your family members or somebody you love turn against you that way. And a father loves his sons, and so David loved Absalom, and it was evident in our prior reading that David loved Absalom, but yet here we find that Absalom turning against his father, and that's a hard thing for any father to have to go through. But you have to also get the picture that God said these things would happen, that trouble was going to come out of his own house. So this is actually prophecy being fulfilled. God said it through Nathan, and you have to get that picture that God said it, and if God said it, it will happen. But this you have to also get this picture as we read, especially to the conclusion of this story. You're gonna find if God said something is going to happen, when it happens, if He told you that He was going to be with you, and that He blessed you, and that He loved you, and that He would not take the kingdom from you, it will not happen. Why? Because the Lord said it. Can you get the picture? You have to get the word of the Lord, and not just one little piece of the word. Get all of the word. When you get all of the word, you'll know that God will always bring you out all right. And here Absalom had lifted himself up in the hearts of the people, and many people followed him. And verse 13 again, and there came messengers to David, saying, "The heart of the men of Israel are with Absalom." As we read on in 14, and David said unto his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise, let us flee, for we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed a part, lest he overtake us suddenly, and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword." And the king's servant said unto the king, "Behold, thy servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king shall appoint." In other words, they're saying to David, "We are with you, David, and we'll do whatever you tell us to do. Whatever you will appoint, that we will do. And I don't care what happens. There's always somebody is going to stay and be loyal to the king, to the leader, and so don't worry about it, but you got to get what God will deal with is when people are in the wrong spirit and in the wrong attitude. God will deal with them, but yet He knows how to protect you and prosper you. Now let's read in verse 16. And the king went forth, and all his household after him, And the king left 10 women who were concubines to keep the house. Well, he took everybody with him. I'm assuming he took his wives and everyone, but he left 10 women there who were his concubines. And David had a number of concubines as well as a number of wives. As we read in verse 17, and the king went forth, and all the people after him, and tarried in the place that was afar off. So the king left Jerusalem and took a great company with him, and they tarried in a place that are far off. They went quite a ways away from Jerusalem. Why? Because Absalom was coming, and the king was using wisdom, because Absalom had lifted himself up and got himself an army, if you please, and ready to fight. And so David did the wise thing so that they wouldn't be caught unaware and be in the middle of a battle that they were unaware that was coming. In verse 18, and all his servants passed on beside him, and all the Cherethites, and all of the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, 600 men who came after him from Gath, passed on before the king. Can you get the picture? All of these folks passed on before the king. In verse 19, then said the king to Attai the Gittite, why goest thou also with us? Return to thy place and abide with the king. And thou, for thou art a foreigner, and also an exile. I want to read that. Read that for clarity. Then said the king to Attai the Gittite, why goest thou before us? Return to thy place and abide with the king, for thou art a foreigner and also an exile. Can you get what he's saying? They were all going out before the king, and they said, you go back and be with the king. Verse 20, whereas thou camest but yesterday, should I this day make thee go up and down with us, seeing I go wherever I may return, I go wherever I may, return thou and take back thy brethren, mercy and truth be with thee. And Attai answered the king, he answered David, and Attai answered the king and said, as the Lord liveth, and as my Lord the king liveth, surely in what place my Lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also will thy servant be. In other words, King, I will stay with you regardless of what happens. If things turn out good, I'm going to be with you. If they turn out bad, I'm going to be with you. I hope you're reading what's going on here. In verse 22, and David said to Attai, go and pass over, and Attai the Gittite passed over, and all his men, and all the little ones who were with him. Verse 23, and all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people passed over. The king also himself passed over the brook Kidron, and all the people passed over toward the way of the wilderness. Can you get the picture? The way of the wilderness. They went to the way of the wilderness. I'm going to say something. I don't know if we'll read, but they went to the way of the wilderness, and that could be for more reasons than one. Sometimes people they can fight in the city, they can fight in open ground, but if you get them out in the wilderness, they can't handle themselves out in the wilderness. Well, I'm going to talk about that in a little while, but let's read on in verse 24. And lo, Zadok also, and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God, and they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had passed out of the city. Can you get the picture? He went up until all the people went out of the city, and the king said to Zadok, carry back the ark of God to the city. And if I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me again and show me both it and its inhabitants. If I have found favor in the Lord, he's saying, take the ark back to Israel. If I found favor in the eyes of the Lord, he's going to get me back to it and everything that's in it. In verse 26, but if he thus said, I have no delight in thee. Behold, here am I. Let him do to me as seemeth good unto him. So can you get what David is saying? You carry the ark of the covenant back to Israel. If the Lord want to bless me, and he'll get me back to Israel, back to the ark of the covenant, back to Jerusalem. But if he doesn't, let God do with me whatever he will. But the ark of the covenant needs to be where it's supposed to be. Can you get what David is saying? But he always reverenced and talked about God. In verse 27, the king said unto Zadok the priest, art thou a seer? Art not thou a seer? Aren't you a seer? Return unto the city in peace, and your two sons with him, Ahimaaz, thy son, and Jonathan, the son of Abiathar. Can you see? David asked him, aren't you a seer? Don't you know everything is going to be all right? Number one, God dealt with David too, and he's just letting this priest know, aren't you a seer? Don't you know that God is going to make everything all right? In verse 28, see, I will tarry in the plains of the wilderness until there come word from you to inform me. I will stay here in the wilderness until I hear word from you, for you to inform me. Verse 29, Zadok, therefore, and Abiathar carried the ark of God again to Jerusalem, and they tarried there. Verse 30, and David went up by the ascent of Mount Olives, and wept as he went up, and had his head covered, and he went barefooted, and all the people who were with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went up. What are you talking about? They covered their head. This was a sign of humility, and they took off their feet, and they took off their shoes, and they went up barefooted. Verse 31, and one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators of Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray thee, return the counsel of Ahithophel unto foolishness. In other words, now that was one of David's counselors, if you please. And so we're going to read on, and we'll catch on there. We're almost finished with this chapter, but I'm going to finish it tomorrow. Well, my dears, I want you to know that I love you with the love of the Lord. Again, I say Merry Christmas to you. I want you to know that I pray for you every day and will continue to do so. If you feel like being a blessing to this ministry, please do so. It is needed and will help us further the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, I want you to know I love you, my friends. God bless you.